Hello everybody, today I'm going to show you how I make the molds for the foam heads for my taxidermy mounts using this otter skull. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to freeze that skull. We're going to do a couple things. I typically will take the eyeballs out of it. So there's a little bit of an indent there, so that'll, when the whole mount is done, that'll indicate where the eyes are supposed to go. I also try and leave the nose cartilage on the skull if I'm intending to make it into a mold. So again, we'll fill that whole part out of there. I can always cut it off when I'm mounting it if I don't want it there, but at least it gives me that option. Next thing you're going to do is build, doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just something like this to hold that skull on its side while we're making this mold. And then we're going to take some clay and we're going to build up clay all around the circumference of the skull from the front to the back, about at the halfway point. Doesn't have to be exact, but you want it about there. You want to make sure this clay is out far enough, like probably at least ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch, because that's going to be the edge of our mold where they come together. So if you don't have enough there, it's not going to work as well. So make sure you give yourself a fair amount sticking out the side. And try and keep it relatively smooth. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's go all the way around so it connects to itself. You have to add some underneath, gonna help support it if it's trying to fall down. There, one last support coming at the back. I'll maybe build it up in a couple spots. Like here you can see it's a little thin, so I'll just build that up a little bit. Just like that. And then we're going to take anything you can use, anything you can just build up the clay if you want to. I just use some squirrel eyes because I buy them in bulk, so I have lots of them. And put a couple of those around there because that's going to help when this is all done and you have the two halves. These will help the whole thing come together and stay in the right position. If you're confused what I'm talking about, it'll make sense at the end of the video, so just trust the process and it'll all come together, I promise you. Okay, so for now we're going to stick this off to the side. I'm going to grab some other stuff and then we'll be right back. So next thing we got to do is take some petroleum gel and we're going to smear this entire skull with a thin layer of petroleum gel or some similar thing. So what this is going to do is act as a release agent so that when we use the Bondo to actually make the mold, it's not going to stick to everything. So this, you just want a thin layer. You just got to make sure you get it everywhere, all over the clay, all over the skull. And it doesn't need to be super thick, like just a really thin layer is all you need. If you go too thick, it starts messing with the shape of everything, so you want just thin layer. You should get inside that eye. Oops. All over the whole clay. One other thing you want to do, I forgot to mention earlier, when you're getting the skull prepped for this, is you want to try and freeze it so it's as smooth as possible. Obviously there's going to be parts that, like the mouth and things like that, where you can't really do much about that, but anything at the back here, when you cut it off, try and make it as smooth as possible, because it'll just make the molds or the forms pop out of the mold way easier if there's not a bunch of weird things that are going to get hung up on it. So if you can, try and keep it as smooth as you can. So that's getting pretty good. A little bit in there, I can see. Okay, so the next step is we're going to make some Bondo up. I know this isn't Bondo brand, but it works just as good, so it comes in a nice big tub. That's why I use this. Make sure you mix up a good amount of this. It takes more than you expect it would, because you don't want it to be too thin, because then your mold is prone to break. So make sure you build up enough of this so that you can make it nice and thick. Just give this guy a shake first, just to mix it up. I'm going to add quite a bit of this because I want it to harden fairly quickly. Now we're just going to take this and we're going to cover this whole thing in a real good thick layer. Ideally you want this to be like 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch thick all the way around. If you make it too thin, when you put the foam inside, as the foam expands, it creates a lot of pressure. And you don't want that foam to bust through the side of your mold, because that defeats the whole purpose of it. So you're gonna make sure we got a good layer all the way around. You can see how much it takes. Completely cover it. You can see I didn't make too much extra. So just keep smoothing that out, make sure that it's got the whole thing covered up. Make sure all the way around the edge. And don't worry if you have any little jaggedy parts that pop up or something like that. Like, you can always smooth them out if you're worried about it afterwards. The biggest thing is making sure you've got that thickness all over the entire skull. I usually kind of where I think the eyes are, make sure to push down in there, make sure it goes into that eye hole. There, so we'll let this dry and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so this guy is good and dry now. You can tell it's hard. So what we're going to do now is flip it over and we're going to pull all that clay off of there. And we're going to take our knife and kind of cut some of that excess off around the edge here. So we try and flatten that out a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfectly flat, you just want it to be relatively. Something like this. And then we are essentially just going to repeat that process. Take our petroleum gel, give this side a real good coating. We got our Bondo made. Gotta cover this whole guy up again. Make sure get a good coating over the whole entire skull. And on the lip, you want to make sure that goes to the lip. Let this part dry now, and then we will move on to the next part after that. Okay, so we've got our mold here completely dry. It's rock hard. So the next step is we're going to take a sander and we're going to smooth out all these jagged pointy parts. And then we're going to sand the edge here until we find the seam. We'll split this apart and get the skull out of there. And yeah, then we'll move on from there. now that we've got that edge kind of roughly sanded, we're looking for the line here where the two halves come together. So we're going to take our knife. You can see we're just going to put that in there, and it's already starting to split. Just gently work that all the way around until it splits. You'll end up with two halves like that. So we're going to put some gloves on, and then we're going to slowly try and work this skull out of here like that. So at this point, we're done with this. So we're left with two halves that are full of that petroleum gel. So what we got to do is get rid of all that petroleum gel, and then we're going to coat this thing with wax, and that's what's going to keep the foam from actually sticking to this mold when we put it in there. So to get rid of that petroleum gel, we're going to use a heat gun. You can see this heat gun will just melt all that petroleum jelly, and then you can just pour it right out. It's okay if some of it's left in there, that's not going to hurt anything. It's just you don't want excessive amounts of it in there. Before we get the wax in here, I'm going to drill a relief hole. So when you put the foam in there, it has somewhere to go if you put too much in there, which you're almost inevitably going to do. So I kind of just take a look at which side makes the most sense for that relief hole. Probably this one here, just looking at the angle of the back of the head. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drill a hole right back here, about 1/4 inch-ish size hole. Doesn't have to be huge, just to give somewhere for that excess foam to exit. Try and wipe as much of the shavings out of there as you can. You can see it's just a small little hole right there, nothing crazy. Doesn't have to be huge. You want the foam inside to be able to expand and kind of be under pressure, so it gets denser, so it's harder. But you don't want it so much that it pops the mold apart. Our last step is to put the wax in here. So the key takeaway from this is you need to heat the actual Bondo mold up hot before you let the wax go in there, so it'll actually stick to this. If you just melt wax and pour wax in there and swoosh it around, the wax isn't going to adhere to this, and it's just going to flake off every time. If you heat this up before you put the wax in, the wax will actually form a very thin layer, and you can get quite a few molds out of this before you have to re-wax it again. If you just pour wax in here and call it good, you're gonna get maybe one, maybe two before you're gonna have to put more wax in there. So make sure you heat this up first and give that wax a chance to actually adhere to it. That's one of the key takeaways with adding the wax to this. That's probably good at this point. We'll start melting some wax into there. So I just use a candle. You can see it kind of goes down the candle wick. You can kind of control where the wax goes. So what I'm going to do is just fill quite a bit of wax inside here, and then maintaining the heat on it as I kind of swoosh that wax around. You want to make sure you're wearing gloves for this because that wax is very hot, and you're going to get some on your hands for sure, and if you aren't careful, it's going to hurt a lot. You just kind of keep spinning it and letting that wax go into all the different spots and nooks and crannies. You want to make sure on the half that has the relief hole, you let that wax go down into the relief hole as well, so that it doesn't stick inside there. You want to have wax all the way through that, and just keep going until eventually the wax will cool down enough and adhere to everything, and you won't see any running around anymore. You'll end up with something like this. So that half's done, so we'll repeat the process on the other half. You see there's still quite a bit of that petroleum gel in there. Gonna dump some of that out. And then we'll start melting our wax. You gotta be careful when you're doing this part too, that it doesn't splash that wax up into your face, because that also really hurts. So let that all heat up, and then we just start slowly, carefully spinning it around while that wax coats everything and adheres to it. You kind of use your fingers if you need to direct it where it needs to go, but you just want to have a good coating all over the whole thing. The wax also fills in some of the voids and different little crevices that might have showed up that can cause potential problems down the road. Just keep doing that. You don't want to let it puddle in the bottom, right? You want to keep it working all the way around. If you end up you melted too much wax in, then just dump some out, but make sure you've got a good coating over everything before you do that. At this point, I'm going to let this half dry as well, and then we'll actually put some foam in there. Okay, we've given this thing a chance to cool off, so now it's time to actually put the foam into it. So I prefer using the expandable foam you buy in a can. The Mouse Shield one works pretty good. It makes a nice dense form when you pull it out of there, so it's good. The triple expansion one works good. It's just you gotta be careful because it does expand like crazy, so if you put too much it will overpressure and blow your mold apart. This one doesn't expand quite as much, so I like it because it's just a little easier or foolproof, so to speak. So the key takeaway if you're going to be using something like this is you need to add moisture inside this mold or it's not going to work. If you're using a two-part foam where you mix two pieces together, the foam expands and hardens through the chemical reaction of the two parts. This, I figured out through a lot of research, hardens with the use of moisture in the air. So when you put this inside of your form or your mold here, if you don't add moisture into there with it, you're just going to end up with a big gloppy, melty mess. And that's what when I first started trying to figure out how to do this, that's what I kept ending up with was I'd make this, I'd get it all set, I'd figure, I'd add the foam to it, and it would just end up this big gloppy, sticky soup. So I did a bunch of research on and figured out that was the problem, and there wasn't enough moisture in here. So it's a super easy problem to solve. So if you're going to use any kind of expandable foam like this, you need to do that or it's not going to work. So to do that, we're going to add a bit of this foam. And what I kind of do is just do a little bit, take a spritzer of just tap water. About that much is all you need. Add a little bit on that side. A little bit of water. And I'll add a little bit more like that. And that's all you got to do. If you don't do that part, you're not going to have any luck using the expandable foam like this. So once we get it in there, we're going to put these two pieces together and then we're going to clamp it shut. You want to make sure you put enough clamp on there that it's going to hold together, but not so much that you crush this. If you're not careful, you can crush these molds. So put enough on there to hold it. Make sure everything's lined up. We've got a relief hole right here at the back. So I'm going to let this sit something like this. Maybe. Yeah, like that. Just like this. So as that foam expands, it'll come out of here, but it'll be held in there enough with that clamp that it's going to expand and become very, very dense and hard, which is what you want. So it'll actually hold the shape. And then, like I said, any of the excess, you can already see it's starting to try and pop its way out of here. And that's what you want. If you don't see that, then you didn't add enough foam. And I'd always rather add a little bit extra and have a little bit of waste than to not add enough and then you don't end up with a good looking form afterwards. So we're gonna let this foam do its thing, and then we'll come pop it out of there and see how it looks. Now that I've given this some time to dry, you can see quite a bit of that foam came out of the relief hole here. So we'll bust that part off. I don't throw these parts away typically. I'll use them, like take this part off there. They work really good when you're making taxidermy habitat, just to add a little bit of texture to the ground or whatever like that. So a lot of times I'll keep these pieces of foam. You can sand it down a little bit, glue that in, cover it with some moss or something, and it adds to the habitat. So you can get some use out of that foam. It's not a waste. So the next thing I'm gonna do is try and pop this guy open. Like that. There. So this is what they look like when they come out of the mold. So we're going to take this guy to the sander, and we're just going to kind of clean this up a little bit, and then we'll take a look and see what we got. And here's our finished head. As you can see, with some pretty minimum cleanup. It's looking pretty good. I just marked where the eyes are just so you can see that a little more clearly. But yeah, so there I've got a otter head that's exactly the size of that the head that we made the mold off of. So this works really good if you're doing oddball species, or maybe you've got something that you're not going to be able to find a commercial form for. You can make your own. Or if you've got something that you're going to be doing a pile of, like I do piles and piles of squirrels. So squirrel head's pretty well the same most of the time. I made a mold off of that, and I can use it over and over and over again. Like these things, you can keep using them over and over as long as it doesn't break. The only maintenance on it is after maybe half a dozen or so molds, just re-wax it. Just make sure you keep that in there. You'll notice it's time to start changing it when you see how easy this popped out of there. When they start resisting coming out, it's time to put more wax in it, and then they'll just pop out again like nothing. And yeah, you can reuse these over and over and over again. Like those squirrel ones, I don't know how many hundreds of squirrel heads I've pulled out of that thing, and they just keep working. So it's a really good cost-effective way if you're doing piles of one type of animal that you want to keep repeating, or if you're doing oddball stuff, or if it's just something you want to try and do. You could use this. I use it mostly for the heads, but you could use it for anything. Like in theory, you could do an entire carcass if you wanted to, if you had the time and the money to spend on the Bondo to do the whole animal carcass, if you had some weird position you wanted to put it in. Yeah, it's just a good skill to have. So hopefully that clarifies some things for people. I know it's one of the most common questions I get asked on this page is, how do I make the foam heads for my mount? So if you have any other questions, drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer it for you.